Welcome to episode 3 of the Community Collective podcast. My name is Jonathan Gary. I'm a member here at Community, and I am here with
Joel Straub. How you doing, man?
I'm pretty good. How about
Good.
yourself?
Doing good.
So we have had a crazy couple of weeks here in Ohio.
A little bit.
What has been going on?
So windstorms. Front of the church sign is, I don't know if you've seen it when you pulled in, but the front of the church sign's like ripped off, like part of the vinyl's coming off. And then 70 degrees to 20 degrees?
Yep. I literally have a farmer's tan sunburn right now because we were sitting out on the patio on Sunday and all day it was 70 degrees and beautiful. And I got sunburned pretty good. And then 2 days later, it's 18 degrees and freezing. Crazy.
It's crazy.
And then last week, this all kicked off when all the reports of Bigfoot came out, up in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park area. There's all these reports of people were having Bigfoot sightings and stuff. And then the giant windstorm came, messed up the church, knocked a tree down on the power lines in front of the church, right?
Yeah. Caught fire.
Geez.
Yeah, I think caught fire. Yeah, we had to cancel a Friday night event. And then I just found out yesterday that meteor in Cleveland just blew up over Cleveland.
Yep.
And I was like, what just happened now?
Yep. It literally sonic boomed over Cleveland.
It's been a good day.
It's been a wild
week
here in Ohio, but
it has.
We're still getting through it. So
it has.
Barely with how cold it's been, we're getting through it.
Yeah, I'm ready for the change for sure.
Absolutely. So we have a very interesting topic to talk about today. And I'm just going to be straightforward with everybody. This is not something that I was super versed in until I started studying for this.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that I'm an expert at this, talking to you guys about it, but I have been studying and learning a lot and just so many incredible things. So I'm really excited for this.
It's going to be good.
What are we talking about today?
Yeah. So we are in the middle of a series in the church. Well, not a series, but in our small groups, we're talking about what happened during the last week of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, kind of going day by day. So this video, we wanted to talk about what happened on Saturday of the story of Easter. So a lot of us know Thursday that there was the Passover. We know Friday was the crucifixion, but there's a lot of discussion about what actually happened on Saturday and what does it mean that he descended to the dead and what's that look like. So we thought it'd just be an interesting theology dump to just talk about what that looks like. Like, what do we think happened on that Saturday?
Absolutely. And I didn't even mention it. This is such a special podcast because even though it's only episode 3, this is a special one because this is the first video one.
Yeah.
So that's going to be exciting. So you guys will have to check that out, but maybe not. So you don't have to see both of our ugly mugs, but maybe you'd rather just listen to us. That's okay too. But
yeah.
So where was Jesus on Saturday is what we're talking about. Like I said, not something I was super versed in, but I've learned so many cool things about this. So
yeah,
we have some main text in Scripture that gives us some hints.
Mm-hmm.
I think our first text is in 1 Peter 3. Can be very confusing, and it is very confusing.
It is.
It's a whirlwind, and when you first read it. Yeah, we can start there. Do you want to read that?
Yeah, because it's really the only text we really get as far as what actually happened. It's kind of put into a context where you're like, why did that go in there? But he's got a couple reasons for it. We won't get into the whole thing on that because we want to stick with the text. But 1 Peter 3 and then Luke 16 are probably the biggest texts we find about this date on Saturday that actually happened. So 1 Peter 3 verses 18 to 20. For Christ also suffered once for the sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, which he sent and proclaimed to the spirits in prison because they formerly did not obey. When God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. So you've got
we've got
a lot.
Yeah, we've got proclaiming to the spirits in prison because they did not obey in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. We've got 8 persons. We've got so much in here. And then the parable about Lazarus and the rich man. I'll go ahead and read that real quick.
Yeah.
So Luke 16 verses 19 and 31 says, there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. Wink, wink. That's going to be big later.
Too big.
The rich man died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things, but now he is comforted here and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us is a great chasm that has been set in place so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said. If someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. A lot to unpack in there, too, which helps us a lot.
Yeah.
And something that's so funny about that parable, and I didn't even pick up on when I was first, reading this and relaying it to the topic. At the very end, he talks about asking to send somebody from the dead to his family. And he says, no, if they don't listen to Moses from the prophets, they won't be convinced, even if someone does rise from the dead. And we have Jesus who rose from the dead and, appeared to over 500 people. Mm-hmm. And think about how many people still haven't been convinced, even though Jesus rose from the dead. So that's just a funny thing that totally unrelated to this topic, but I just picked out as I was reading that, and I thought it was super cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a few choice words in that passage as well. Like I said, Abraham's side. The ESV, does the ESV say Abraham's bosom?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a fun one to say.
Yep.
And then Hades we have in there.
It's a big one.
Which also is Sheol in Hebrew, if I'm right.
Yep.
Yeah. So a couple good texts there. They give us some clues about where Jesus was on Saturday.
Yep.
So
yeah, it's really confusing. You've got everything from some kind of parable or story about Lazarus and Sheol and death, and that's in there. And then you've got all these things of Noah and God's patience. You got death and spirits in prison. It's a lot. So I would say let's jump into it and see what we get, as we go along. Hopefully it'll make sense to people as we dive into it. But I think the biggest thing you have here is here's what we know for sure, right? We know that based off 1 Peter 3:18-20, Jesus went somewhere in some form, said something to someone or some people before coming back to earth on Easter morning.
Yep.
Like they're not
it's just kind of vague. That's really leaving us craving for answers.
Yes. Somewhere, some form, said something, came back from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty clear, right? I think it's the right way it's what we need to be. I think before we get into the actual text, a lot of the history of this text comes through the actual creeds. And so I don't know if you are familiar with creeds are, but basically they're short, easy to remember explanations of bigger theology. Mm-hmm. And they're actually making a comeback. Tim Keller actually wrote a book called New City Catechisms, I think.
Okay.
And he talks about the idea of having answers for these big theological questions that are smaller and easy to remember. And so since there was no scripture back then, there was no Bible that people could have in the early 1500s, 1400s, they would rely on these statements to kind of answer theology questions rather than having their own copy of the Bible.
Yeah.
And so there was 3 major ones. There was the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, and then the Anthesian. And the Anthesian's kind of like the one that everybody's kind of like, I'm not really sure that guy's right. So the 2 major ones, though, the Nicene is far more in the Catholic tradition. Mm-hmm. And then the Apostles' Creed is a lot more in the evangelical. I think we've all heard the Apostles' Creed before, but that's kind of the history of why we got this idea of him descending somewhere, going somewhere, as they took this passage and said, it's important enough that people should know.
Yeah. So, and speaking of history, church history and stuff, I have 2 extremely profound quotes from Martin Luther on 1 Peter 3, verse 19.
All right.
So this is Martin Luther an incredibly well-known theologian. He basically and Martin Luther was a German monk too as well, which is pretty cool. I didn't know that about him,
He
but,
swore a
he
lot.
did he?
He had a mouth.
Oh, wow.
He had a mouth and he loved alcohol.
Oh, wow. And he basically, birthed the Protestant Reformation,
Yeah.
which is just a huge thing. But so 2 profound quotes I have here about this. This is from Martin Luther. First one is, "A wonderful text this is, and a more obscure passage perhaps than any other in the New Testament, so that I do not know for a certainty just what Peter means."
Good. Good.
Isn't that
Good.
crazy?
Good.
This is one of the more profound theologians in church history, and he's saying, "Yeah, I don't really know what Peter means here." And then the second one is he says, "After reading a number of scholars on this text, I have come to the conclusion that they don't know for a certainty either, and neither do I. For the most part, I think the preacher would do well to avoid getting bogged down trying to explain this verse."
Well, let's just wrap it up here. I mean, I think we're done, right?
Martin Luther said, just
So
avoid it.
just
So
avoid it.
we're wiping our hands clean of it. No, I just thought that was so funny because,
Yeah.
he's such just a big character in, the history of the church. And just to see him say these things about this passage, like, oh man, like we're
Yeah.
really getting into something here. So before we got into it, I just thought that was so funny that he said those things about this passage.
Yeah, and it was right around that time that they were trying to decide what to do with this passage and what to include in the creeds. And so, to the idea of the Nicene Creed, the actual Nicene Creed in the Catholic Church, there's not even any mention of this. There's no mention of the going to hell or not to hell. The Anesthesia of Alexandria, he talked about it, but his creed was not put into writing or circulation until Augustine, which is around the 5th century. And he would say this in the Anthesian Creed, he would say, "Who suffered for our salvation, descended into hell, rose again on the 3rd day from the dead." So he would have he descended, 3 days later he came back. And then we have the well-known Apostles' Creed, which so many people probably even now know. And he says the Apostles' Creed, it says, "He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified and was buried. He descended into hell, and on the 3rd day he rose from the dead." So the Nicene doesn't touch it. Anthesian, which I think we can just toss out. There's a lot of his stuff that you're like, ugh, he was actually deemed a heretic later, so it doesn't really work well for him. And then the Apostles' Creed, which a lot of people go to, actually has a lot to say about, well, not a lot, but he has that clear statement. He descended into hell on the 3rd day. And so a lot of people didn't just believe that creed is what First Peter's talking about. So we need to understand, like, is that true? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Or is there more to it?
Yeah. There is one surefire verse that tells us, where Jesus exactly was for sure, at least the day he was crucified. So in Luke 23, verses 40 to 43, this is Jesus on the cross, and the 2 thieves are hurling insults at him, or the one thief is hurling an insult at him. So verses 40 to 43, they say, "But the other criminal rebuked him." Actually, let me back up to verse 38. So there was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." So we know from this verse, Jesus says today he's going to be in paradise.
Yep.
So
and it goes to that question. He went somewhere. And so where is that somewhere? Did Jesus actually go to hell?
Yep.
And that's a big question because it raises a lot of concerns. Like, if he went to hell, how could a pure and holy God descend to the place of the unrighteous, which would be hell? And the idea of, you mentioned the other two, the Hades and Sheol kind of thing, or not Sheol, it'll be Gehenna here in a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think we have to talk about that first, right? We have to talk about, where did he actually go? Because we know he went somewhere.
Yeah.
And so he talks about, you'll be with me in paradise. We talk about there is a hereafter.
Yep.
What does that hereafter look like? And I think it's important, especially for those who maybe don't even know Christ, right? Like, to know that there is a hereafter, and what does that actually look like? So the Old Testament actually teaches there's a conscious afterlife. In other words, it's not just like we're worm food and that's it. It's not annihilationism. It's clearly that there's a known consciousness of our souls in the afterlife. The Old Testament also says there are tiers of the afterlife or levels of the afterlife. We'll get into that. But the New Testament actually supports both of those as well. The New Testament will say it's a conscious place, paradise, this idea mentioned, and the tiers are there as well. Greco-Roman understanding of the afterlife as well. In that culture, the New Testament shares some crucial elements, namely the world with 3 tiers. So even the outside of Jesus followers and the Greco-Roman world would have said, yes, there's some kind of afterlife dimension that has some kind of layers or tiers to it that we just read about in Luke 16. So,
yeah. And we see this kind of afterlife picture is referred to as Hades, which is the Greek version of it, or Sheol, which is the Hebrew version of it. And so when most people hear, hell and Hades and stuff, they think that's the same place. But from what I've been learning, that is not the same place actually.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is a mind-blowing thing because, hell, obviously we all know hell, it's eternal separation from God. That is a scary place to be. But you hear the term Hades, I feel like that's an equally as scary term. Like you do not want to be, caught up in Hades, but it's actually not the same place. I see a few places in scripture. It talks about how Hades is actually the realm of the dead.
Correct.
Where both believers and unbelievers are being held until the final day of judgment. Believers are in blessed side of Hades, which is paradise, or as we see in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, Abraham's side, or Abraham's bosom.
Let's go.
And the unbelievers are in the cursed side of Hades, which is hell. So big difference there between hell and Hades. There's actually, like you saying, there is a tier system. There is 2 sides. And then, in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, we saw those 2 sides. And we see that there's a great chasm between them as well. And that people in hell are actually going to be able to see those who are in paradise.
Yeah, it's not able to be, from what we understand in Luke 16, if you take it as literal, you see that there's an ability to know and see, but not be able to touch, go to, interact, clearly in that form. And the one of the books I highly recommend in this is called He Descended to the Dead. And in that, I'm going to put this chart up for you. It actually, we'll show it here as we're talking, but the chart actually gives these 3 tiers, and you'll see that here on the screen. But the 3 tiers, as you just mentioned, were paradise or Abraham's bosom, which was the righteous souls. So we believe that if you accept Jesus Christ, that once you are immediately after death, you are instantly in the presence of God. And so we believe that you are in that righteous place. And so our loved ones who have gone ahead of us, that's where we say they are. They are in paradise, or Abraham's bosom, as it's called in Luke 16. And then there's the second tier, which is Gehenna, or the lake of fire. And actually, just to change a little bit, Hades actually is in that same term. Gehenna, lake of fire, Hades. And that's where the unrighteous souls are. There's passages about God sending the souls that were in rebellion to him, and they are placed in this I'm sorry, that's the next one. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The unrighteous souls would be those who have no relationship with God, and that is the Gehenna, lake of fire. Hades is unrighteous souls. So those are the 2 that I think are pretty obvious for most people. They're like, okay, that makes sense, right? If you accept Christ, you go to heaven. If you don't, you go to hell, and this is Hades and unrighteous souls. Well, the third tier that we don't talk about is what's called the abyss, or Tartarus, and that's where the fallen angels or demons who rebelled in Satan's downfall that we read about in the Old Testament. That's where we believe the fallen angels or demons are held until the final day when he returns, and then they are released. And there's a whole theological study about that.
Yeah. And so these, not to get ahead of you or too off topic, but so these are the abyss, Tartarus. This is where the angels are that are being held under the Euphrates River, technically, until their time in Revelation comes. That's where we're talking about. That is the abyss we're talking about, right?
Correct. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you see it throughout Scripture, and I think we are just so used to a physical world that's what we all think about. But I think we need parts of our theology that make us either uncomfortable or we don't fully know. And that's where we see this of like, how do these 3 exist, and how are they separate, but you can still see? I don't have all the answers for that, but I do know that the Scripture, based off Luke 16 and other places, that there is these tiers to it. And And so my belief is that Jesus himself, of those 3 tiers, we asked the question, where did he go? My belief is he didn't go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't go to Tartarus. I believe that he went to the place of the dead, which means all 3. He was able to be present and see all 3 places, and these places as tiers. And so specifically, he went to Abraham's bosom, which is the righteous, to proclaim that his conquering and that he was victorious.
Mm-hmm.
But because of Christ and who he is, it's stated that all of them heard the victory that he established over death. And that's important. We'll come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
His victory over death, but he announced it in the place of the dead, which would be like, I don't know if you want to say amphitheater, but it's like he could be in all 3 realms, but it wasn't that he was in with the angels or that he specifically was in paradise.
Yep.
And as he announces it, he's announcing it to all of them.
Yep.
So
we can back up to, our main text here. We can say, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. So we know, now we have some answers at that point. So he went to paradise in the realm of the dead, and he proclaimed to the spirits in prison. So there we get into a thing. Who were the spirits in prison?
Yeah, correct.
So we get a context clue about the spirits in prison. Verse 20 says, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. So these spirits in prison were spirits that did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives us a little bit of a context clue about who those spirits were.
And that'll be an interesting debate, because some people would debate that and say that's not specifically where he's talking about. He's talking about the unrighteous souls as in the flood of and so it's not just those specific ones, but it's across the board of those who are unsaved. So there's a bunch of different takes on that. And it all depends on how you put the context of Noah and why he puts Noah into that specific context in 1 Peter. So
yeah, I think I saw that was one of the ways that people interpreted this. Another way that people interpreted it that I think could potentially make sense as well. It makes sense to me, at least, that they could be fallen angels, and more specifically the Nephilim. And who are the Nephilim?
That's interesting. Yeah.
We back up to Genesis 6:4. Says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God, fallen angels, went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So the Nephilim, who, the fallen angels, went and had children with the woman of the earth. And now you have this hybrid breed of human and angel who are the Nephilim. And, there's not a ton of information in the Bible about the Nephilim, but, there's a little bit in the book of Enoch and stuff. And that's, outside of this conversation. But we know that the Nephilim were absolutely disobedient to God, and they were absolutely in the days of Noah. And, we know God sent the flood to the earth because of how wicked earth had gotten. I think the Nephilim played a huge role in the earth becoming that wicked. So there's a good chance that, it could be the Nephilim are the spirits that we're talking about here. And, Jesus went and was proclaiming his victory over the Nephilim, who are, Satan's angels, and just to proclaim victory over them and say, look, you thought you guys won, but I won.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the ways I saw people were interpreting it. And that one could make sense to me as well. To me, it makes a little bit more sense than they were the unsaved souls from that day. I don't know what your thoughts are. Which side do you think might make a little bit more sense? But that one made a little bit more sense to me.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I think you can go back to that. I tend to be a little more in the idea of Peter's trying to get across the idea of salvation here, and the water baptism that saves, because that's the context of 3.
Yeah.
So if we keep it in the context of the water saving, rather than going back to Noah, I think he's using Noah as an example. But I think his main point as he talks about this, even as he ends that section, he's talking about baptism, which corresponds to this: now saves you, not a removal of dirt for the holy, but an appeal to God for the body. So yeah, I think you can kind of go both places with it. And again, the reason I say you can go both places is because we don't really know. You know what I mean? So I think it's fun to debate it, and I think you can go different places. But the biggest thing I think we're saying in this, what happened on Saturday, is he went somewhere, and we believe that somewhere was the place of the dead, which is the place of the righteous souls, which is paradise. There, the 3 tiers that you saw on the chart that we put up there is the tiers that were there. He's announcing something. We'll get into that. But before we even get into announcing something, the fun part for me in this is that he had some form as he went.
Yeah.
And so what form did he go in, and why is that important?
Yeah. So we can see that from the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. He looks up and he sees Lazarus in Abraham's bosom, by Abraham's side. And so you'd imagine Abraham had some sort of godly, restored, glorified body. And so you think Jesus would have gone to paradise and, was in the same way as well. He was, I think there's a good chance he was, in the flesh looking like he did on earth, but maybe more of a glorified, renewed version of that. What would you think?
Yeah, I'm torn on that one, because if you read it straight literally, I think that's important. But I think if you also read it in the literary context of, like, what are we supposed to know by the context of the literary genre that it was, we have to keep in mind Luke 16 before we start just putting dogmatic statements down. It was truly a story to represent something bigger than it wasn't shared to tell us what the hereafter looks like.
Yeah.
It was meant to tell us that, there was a punishment that caused Lazarus because he was not repentant of his sins, and he had this effect. However, I think we can play around in that field and say, Abraham's bosom and the physical. I would say there's definitely some kind of identifier or some kind of a known factor that they would recognize that, right? So I think as we think of what's beyond us, it's an interesting debate of, like, when our loved ones go and we lose them, how do they know, each other? How do they identify one another? If it's just souls, like, floating in this place, how do they actually know and identify traits, because their physical body is still here? And so, to me, I don't get caught up in all of the debate of, like, that, because I just don't know. But to me, I say he went in the soul form. We know that because he left his body, and his body was still here, and he was existing consciously in there. And the reason I feel like the form is so important, or to walk through that scenario is important, is because we'll talk about this at the end as well, but it's important because Jesus says he knows all the things that we experience here on earth. He doesn't only experience the things here on earth, he also has experienced death. And so he is the only one who has experienced death. Well, Lazarus, I guess, could say something too. Has experienced this death and come back and said, I know what it is like to leave this physical earth, to go to paradise and come back. Like, to me, that's so reassuring of, like, no matter where we debate of flesh and not flesh and how we know, to me, I think the bigger point that I can pull out of 1 Peter 3 and Luke 16 is that, man, he knows all the experience, including death. Like, he knows what it's like to leave this physical body behind. I don't know if you've been in situations like this, but having been there with my grandma and other people, like, there is a big difference between those who are followers of Christ when they leave this earth versus somebody who doesn't. And I can tell you, for my grandmother's sake, when I was with her when she passed, and it was a spiritual, it's the only way to explain it, a spiritual experience that I knew that she was calm, she was at peace, she was content and excited to leave this physical body. But you knew, like, I didn't have to, nobody had to come in and pronounce that she was gone. You knew. And her body just relaxed, and you could tell she was no longer there. And so we all know we go somewhere, but this is very clear that, Christ in the soul form leaves his body, so he knows what it means to experience death, which is crazy and so hopeful. Like, doesn't have to freak us out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, which is incredibly just so comforting and so different than any other god of any other religion because, we talked in the last podcast a little bit about how Jesus came as a suffering God. He was familiar with pain. Um, so not only, whatever you're going through in your life right now, not only does Jesus understand it, but he understands what it's like for the ultimate pain to happen to you, which is death.
yeah.
He understands that because he went through it and he came back from it. So he's the only one that's living who is able to be at your side to help you through all that,
Yeah.
which is that's a big thing.
Did you ever get freaked out when you were young about the word forever or heaven, things like that?
A little bit, yeah, because
Yeah.
it was just such a mystery to me.
Yeah. I remember as a 6th grader, it freaked me out and pastors meant it as like this really awesome thing, like you'll live forever, it'll be great, and
Mhm.
eternity.
Yeah.
And every time I came back, I'm like, my brain was just like, I forever, like
Yeah.
it's not going to stop.
Mhm.
Like there's an end to everything we do. What do you mean it's
Yeah.
so it was much later that I kind of had to understand all of that and come around it. But like, I think when you first hear it, it can be somewhat terrifying.
Absolutely.
And so it's in comfort to know that Jesus has already gone ahead of us, even in death.
Mhm.
And so his soul leaves his body on that Friday and is physically present then on that Saturday in the place of the dead.
Yeah. So, can I rabbit trail a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I know we didn't wanna get too much into, who was Jesus talking to, proclaiming to the spirits, but I just did some I found a little bit more information. I just thought it was really interesting to
Yeah.
me, and I just wanted to rabbit trail a little bit. Whenever you wanna shoot the rabbit, just tell me,
Okay.
and we'll get back off of it. But I was talking about, how there's potentially who he was talking about, the spirits where it was the Nephilim, and we know that the Nephilim fallen angels, um, they are being held in hell right now. 2 Peter 2 verse 4 says, "For God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment." Um, Jude verses 5 and 6, because though you already know this, I want to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. Um, so, Jesus, he clearly, made a proclamation of victory when he was in paradise. And, whether it was whoever it was directed to isn't the biggest deal, but we do know that, these angels were there in chains, having witnessing Jesus proclaiming his victory. These angels, were the ones who sought to destroy Israel and Jesus, but they failed. Um, and First Peter 3:20 talks about a little bit how they had boundaries. These angels were given like boundaries, but they didn't obey them. Like God, allowed these angels to be on the earth, but kind of like you see in Job, he gave them boundaries that they're not supposed to cross. And they didn't obey them, so that's why they're punished. Um, let's see here, verse 20.
Or we did not obey.
To those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built, there's only a few people. Okay. So we see that, so that was going back to our main text about, the angels and, they didn't obey. So, they were imprisoned. And then something crazy, I thought. So do you remember the demon possessed man that Jesus encounters in Luke 8, verse
Mhm.
26 to 37? Um, so it's the man who, when Jesus was speaking to the demon in him, he said, "I am legion, we are many," and they just begged to be not cast into the abyss, but go into
Yeah.
the pigs. Um, those demons probably saw those fallen angels that we're talking about be imprisoned. They know what happened to them because they overstepped God's boundary for them, and they didn't want that to happen to them. So those demons that were possessing that man probably saw what God did to those fallen angels at that time and sent them into into hell to imprison them into the abyss. And they saw that and were so terrified of that happening. That's why that they said, "Don't send us into the abyss. Send us into those pigs," because they were so terrified of the abyss and what it was. They didn't want it to happen to them. So they were literally there when that happened. And also, um, they were probably all there during Genesis 3, verses 14 and 15, when God curses Satan. So we see the fallen angels invoke evil on humanity, try and destroy Israel and the Messiah for he would come, the offspring of the serpent and the offspring of the woman, which it talks about in Genesis right there. They knew Jesus was the offspring of the woman and the enmity between them. And so, they were there when all this happened. And so you see, God kind of punishing the angels for stepping out of line. And I just think that's so crazy because, those same demons that were in that man that asked to go into the pigs, they were there. They witnessed these angels be sent to the abyss. They witnessed God cursing Satan in the garden, I would say.
So
With
you would
with
say, like, their lifespan is that long?
I think potentially, yeah. Because I think we don't know the Bible isn't clear, what the lifespan of angels are, but I think what is clear is that they obviously fell with Satan to the earth, and then, they're getting cast into, hell, held in chains until the final day of judgment. So I think, the ones that were on the earth through this time, I think they saw all that happen. And that's why when they saw those ones that were sent to the abyss, they're like, no, don't do that to us. We want to get back within our boundaries. So
Yeah,
that was just a little bit of a rabbit trail
yeah,
that I just followed, and I thought that was pretty cool.
yeah, I think it's a lot of, like, I don't fully know,
Yeah.
um, it doesn't really say the lifespan of angels or
Yeah.
demons. Are they eternal?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Do they have, the same characteristics that way? We don't really know,
Mhm.
but it would be interesting. I do find it interesting, though, the idea of the word abyss and the
Mhm.
fact that they used it and said, if that is truly the place of fallen angels or demons, like, to know what that entailed,
Mhm.
like, that is a statement, I think, in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then it doubles down on the importance of this text in First Peter 3 of what happened on Saturday,
Mhm.
because if Christ is on a victory tour and not a humiliation tour,
Mhm.
that's a big difference.
Yeah.
What I mean by that, if he is humbling himself to go to these angels and going to hell,
Mhm.
the humility of Christ going to hell, to a sinful place full of sin, like all sin, without devoid of God,
Mhm.
right? That's what hell is.
Mhm.
Hell is everything that God is not,
Yep.
right? So it's a very, very vivid, like, if you want to know what hell is, just take God out of the equation.
Yep.
If God is life, if God is light, if God is good, if God is, and all those things and his characteristics, and hell is devoid of it.
Mhm.
I think that's why I have a hard time saying he went to the unrighteous souls,
Mhm.
because it seems to contradict other places,
Yeah.
with that. So, to bring it back to that, I think it is a victory tour over those angels,
Mhm.
over the abyss, over the unrighteous souls, and a victory tour to the righteous souls of faith, to
Yeah.
Abraham, to Moses, to
Yeah.
Elijah, to all those ones that, like, went ahead, and he's like, "We won.
Yeah.
I won. I defeated death." And this promise was clear. And so it's a proclamation of victory and not a humiliation tour. And it's through his death, he brought humility to the unrighteous, to the demons, to those angels kept in that place. He's telling them it's all going to change. Philippians 2:10. So at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven, on earth, and under the earth.
Mhm.
Like, that Philippians 2 makes even more vivid of a picture when you think of this being a place that's an actual place, which I believe it is. And he said, every knee is going to bow, not only in what we see here in this world, but in
Mhm.
the abyss, in the Gehenna, in the righteous. Everybody's going to take a knee. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Um, so,
Yeah. So, yeah, just to clarify what I was talking about, I think, Jesus, he absolutely was in paradise. So he was in Abraham's bosom side of the realm of the dead.
yeah, I would agree with
And
that.
I think, like I was saying, it's not of utmost importance who exactly the spirits we're talking about were. It's more important of Jesus' victory. But I think he was proclaiming victory and all these things, from paradise to hell, because we saw
Yeah.
there's a great chasm between, and there can be conscious communication between the two. So yeah, I think Jesus was just like on that victory tour proclaiming that, over all of paradise, but also, for all of hell to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I love that.
Yeah. And just a little bit more to back up that realm of the dead we're talking about.
Yeah.
Acts
Yep.
Acts
Yep.
2,
Yep.
verses 25 to 28, and Luke's quoting Psalm 16. It says, let's see here, Acts 22, 25 to 28. It says, David said about him, I saw the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand. I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body will also rest in hope, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, and you will not let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the paths of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence. So, two things there. So, we see, obviously, David is prophesying about Jesus here, and he talks about Jesus not being abandoned to the realm of the dead, and the Holy One not seeing decay, which is Jesus.
Yeah.
So we get a confirmation here
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that is where Jesus was the realm of the dead. But also, on the victory tour part of it, verse 28 is such Acts 2:28 is such a, and obviously in the Psalm counterpart, Acts 2:28 is such a great verse. It says, I'll read one more time. You have made known to me the paths of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence. So that's just, I'm going to wrap it trail again. I'm sorry about it, but just, so many, of us, especially me as a young person, I really resonate with it, because we all wonder, what is my path of life? What am I supposed to be doing? What is my career? What does God want me to do? And it can be so nerve wracking and disorienting and, discouraging when we don't feel like we have it figured out. But it says literally right here, you have made known to me the paths of life. So God makes us know the paths of life. And really, his path of life for us is, to love him and worship him and to be more like Jesus to the people around us.
Yeah.
And, the more we try and do like that, Jesus is going to fill the rest in. So we're all worried about careers and stuff, but we're not seeking Jesus first. Jesus wants us to seek him, and he'll give us the career, the job, the place, all that stuff. And then as you will fill me with joy in your presence, it's like, man, that's so good. We talk about this victory tour, paradise. And that's why it's called paradise,
Yeah.
because, it's Jesus' victory. That's his place. So just being in the presence of God, that's where true joy comes from. I just think that's so good. So not only, in paradise can we receive this joy, but right now, being in the presence of God, we can receive that joy. So I just think that's such a good verse. But yeah, that first part of this, quoting Psalm 16, kind of further confirms, we're talking about the realm of the dead here, which is Hades or Sheol, and then the multiple tiers and stuff.
Yep. And not to put more rabbits out there, but I think if you're watching this and you're interested, like what we were talking about with the Nephilim and things like that, if you're confused by that and you're like, what's he talking about? I don't even know what this Nephilim, like a Nephil what? And I think you're confused by that. It is one of those things that you need to go back to and read Genesis chapter 6, and those fallen angels, especially Genesis 6:1. And so I think as we're kind of looking at this thing again, just to kind of bring it all back, we know he went somewhere, place of the dead, which we believe he went to paradise and not to hell. We believe that he went in some form. We believe that he was leaving his body, whether that soul is a physical form of like his human side. I think you could go there. I think you could see that if you wanted to. I think others would have a case of like, no, it's just a soul, and maybe not have all the features of humanity. I don't know, but we know the form we do know is he left his physical body. And that, again, that helps us to understand that he walked through death. He said something. So we've mentioned that he's said exactly what Acts 2 said: proclamation, victory. It's over. Like it's done. Like I don't know what you guys are celebrating over on your end of unrighteous souls and angels, but it's done. It's over. Like, and I think I love that about Christ, is just putting the foot down on it, and just the proclamation. So he's proclaiming victory to someone, and I think here's where I would just give you just a quick caveat to the rabbit trail. So if you're interested in looking at this, the views that are out there is one, what Jonathan was talking about of the Nephilim of Genesis 6:1. That's definitely one of the stronger ones out there. The spirits of the souls of those who died in the flood. So those who were just unrighteous and they died in the flood, the unrighteous souls, but maybe not demons or angels, which maybe. The spirits of the faithful Old Testament. And you're like, well, that doesn't fit because the unrighteous or the righteous are in paradise. I don't know about fully that as you talk about the abyss. And then the weird one out there, I don't know if you saw this in your study or not, but the weird one out there, if you really want to kind of dig into it, is fallen angels. But some say actually the preacher Enoch, and they get that out of Hebrews 11:5 and Jude chapter 14. That's a stretch to me.
Yeah.
To get to Enoch, I think there's a whole reason why he's giving an in Jude, but that is one out there. So if you get curious,
I did not see that one.
Yeah, they say it's the preacher Enoch, and that's who he's. And I'm like, that's a reach. But I'm going with all three tiers. I'm going with the idea that he went to paradise to the righteous souls. He proclaimed victory over all three, and they could hear his victory over all three. And he came back to earth then on the following day. So Easter morning, we know he is risen and back here on earth. In what we know as a new and glorified body, which is a whole other thing as you read Acts and his interactions in Acts. But specifically, we know that this 1 Peter 3, what he did on Saturday was he went to the place of dead, he proclaimed victory to those in prison, and he came back the following day. So,
yeah, it's so good. It's just that's the one thing obviously we wanted to hammer home is just, how Jesus, he understands all of this. He understands the pain and suffering that goes on in this earth that you might be experiencing. You are absolutely not alone when you're suffering through something because Jesus experienced it all. He was familiar with pain. That was a normal thing to him. And not only did he experience all the suffering he could, but he also went to the grave. He experienced exactly what it's like to go through death and to come back from death. And so he's the only one alive, like I said earlier, that is able to counsel us through that because he went through it all. And just like he went through death and rose from it, all who have their faith in him are going to go through death and be resurrected from it again, just like him, which is so great.
Yep.
So another few verses that, as I was doing my research, that people were kind of attributing to try and kind of explain this 1 Peter passage was Ephesians 4:8-10. I'm not sure if you did much look into that. As I was looking into it, I don't think that it's necessarily describing, what's going on in here.
Yeah, I agree.
But I did want to trail off onto a little bit because I think it's just such a good passage about what Jesus did on the cross for us. So I'll read it for us real quick. This is Ephesians chapter 4, verses 8-10. And Paul's quoting Psalm 68:18 here. And he says, "This is why it says, when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. What does he ascended mean except he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe." So I think a lot of people use, descending to the lower earthly regions as to try and kind of justify that. That could be part of it. But I just want to break it down a little bit because there's some cool things about what Jesus doing on the cross says in here. So that part where he says he took many captives. That's my study Bible referenced me to Colossians 2:15, which says, "And having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross." So that authorities is something that kind of piqued me there because I was starting to see it a little bit. We see in Ephesians 6, verse 12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." And so I wanted to back up a little bit in Colossians 2 to verse 10. It says, "And in Christ you have been brought to fullness. He is the head over every power and authority." Which, man,
Right.
Geez, that is a lot going on
Right.
there. That is so good. And
Right.
so Jesus on the cross, he disarmed the power and authority. So when he died on the cross, he all of Satan's power, Satan's official power on this earth was disarmed, taken away. Like when he said, "It is finished," Satan lost all his power. All Satan's angels were watching that, and as soon as he said, "It is finished," they realized it's done. We're
Yeah.
we're
Yeah, yeah,
toast,
yeah.
um, which is crazy. And I just love, in 2:15 where it says, "He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them at the cross." So the definition of spectacle, making a spectacle, it says make a spectacle is a term used to describe the act of creating a scene or drawing attention to oneself in a way that is disruptive or offensive. It involves intentionally engaging in behavior that is designed to shock, offend, or provoke others, often for the purpose of getting attention or causing a reaction. So, a couple of things out of that definition I wanted to pick out was disruptive or offensive.
Mhm.
Like that was Jesus' crucifixion was absolutely God's plan for it to be disruptive and offensive. It disrupted the entire world. We know that as soon as, Jesus gave up the spirit, there was a great earthquake. The curtain of the temple split in two, but it was meant to be disruptive and offensive. Like that, it absolutely was offensive. It was obviously offensive to all the spiritual forces of evil, the evil authorities. And it's also offensive to, the hearts of the unbelievers.
Yep.
That is, when you see it so prevalent, in the world right now. And I'm sure it's always been like that. But you talk about Jesus to a lot of people who don't believe in him or maybe had a bad taste put in their mouth. It's offensive. Like
Yeah.
they have a bad reaction to that. And then just love where it says it involves intentionally engaging in behavior that is designed to shock, offend, or provoke others. Intentionally engaging. God came to the earth in the flesh, a suffering God, experienced all kinds of suffering, and he intentionally engaged in a gruesome death on the cross
Yeah.
for our good. Like, that is what it means to make a spectacle. He intentionally engaged making a spectacle of them, on the cross. He intentionally engaged in going through all that misery and suffering for us so we could have eternal life with them, so we can have true life right now. Oh, I just thought that was so good.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanted to jump one more place. I promise I'm almost done with this rabbit. I wanted to jump all the way back to Matthew, chapter 12, verse 29. Um, and it says, or again, how can anyone enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man? Then he can plunder his house. On the cross, Jesus tied up Satan and his angels. He tied them up
Mhm.
and he took them for everything they had. He
Mhm.
plundered Satan's house.
Yep.
Oh, how good is that?
Yep.
He was hanging on the cross, being killed, crucified in the most agony of pain you could probably ever experience. And in that act, the most weakest, lamest looking thing in the world, he tied up Satan and all his angels and plundered them.
Yeah.
Oh, how good is that?
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Goes back to his victory tour, right? It goes back to that same thing of we think we understand all that happens, but the layers to it of what we're seeing in just that small section of victory. I mean, this is a small taste
Mhm.
of what victory in Christ looks like, right?
Mhm.
And so it's such a important doctrine of the victory of Christ. And it reminds me of why is this podcast so important? Why does it matter what he did on Saturday? One of the things you just mentioned in that whole rabbit trail is the fact that the victory is important. It's
Mhm.
important for us because we understand that he has victory over death,
Yep.
and not just victory over death, but victory over the spirits and angels and things that affect us even today. Like
Mhm.
he has power over those, and the victory is there.
Mm.
You mentioned earlier about he has experienced all things we have. Um, that if Hebrews 4:15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted and yet without sin.
Mhm.
We have one who has been through everything that we have been through. Isaiah 53:3, he was despised, rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised and esteemed him not. Like it wasn't an easy victory. It was a difficult one. It was a humbling one that took him there. And then finally, Hebrews 2:18, for because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Yes, tempted, but I would add that to the same thing. Who are feeling like we don't have victory, we don't have wins, we can't get over the sin. No, you have a victorious king who has taken out the enemy. We have a victorious king who has taken out death. And so we have nothing to fear because he's already gone ahead of us. And so if you've ever freaked out about what's next, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, you should freak out. I mean, you should be freaking out because
Absolutely.
It's a place that no one would wish on no one.
Absolutely.
But to those who have Jesus Christ, there's no reason to freak out. He's already gone ahead of us. He's already promised victory. He's already walked it, so he knows how to comfort us in that thing of death. If you have loved ones who are on their deathbeds and experiencing that, this is that moment to say, Jesus knows what you're going to experience, and he knows how it's going to go out. And so for everyone who's curious about where their loved ones are, if they're followers of Christ, you don't have to be curious anymore. You know that they're present with God. Thessalonians, I believe, talks about away from the body and present with Christ. And the condition of what's next, we understand that from this passage of First Peter and Luke. We have the condition of what's next. We know that we're going to be knowing one another. We know that there's a tier that we are waiting for the final coming of Christ, so that we're all reunited again. And the conquering, again, you mentioned that the conquering promises that go even past this world, and it helps. Not only that, but we don't have the time for this, but even this small doctrine helps support other major doctrines of eschatology, covenants, salvation, humanity, all of those pieces.
And even I wanted to just throw one more tidbit in about my little authority thing, because I have Luke 10, verse 18 and 19, just with like 18. I have Luke 10, 18 and 19 and authority with like 18 exclamation points on my notes.
Yeah.
So Luke 10, 18 and 19 says, he replied, and this Jesus talking, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. There's that word again, authority. And not only did God show his authority through Jesus over the enemy, but it literally says right here, I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. If you are in Christ, you also have the authority, like Christ did, over to these spiritual forces, the spiritual forces in the evil realms. So I think that's such a thing we never think about is, we think about how God, and we read about how Jesus drove out demons and all this different stuff, but we just take it, I think, too lightly that we have that same exact authority to do that, just like Jesus did. We have authority over evil as well.
Do we have it?
Well, we have it because Christ lives in us. I have to. It's Christ who has the authority, but Christ is living in us. So that's So I had to clarify there. I'm sorry about that. I didn't want to. I didn't want to act like we have all the power, but
I don't want to be like the sons of Sceva.
No,
how do we walking out naked? You know what I mean?
Absolutely not. Yeah.
No, that's a great point.
No, it's because all of us who are in Christ, who has Jesus Christ living in us, 100%. In our hearts, because of him, we have that power. So I just thought, man, just that word authority just kept popping up. It's like, man, because Christ lives in us, we have that authority through him.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is so good.
So good.
One more verse I noted down, and then, I know we're probably running short on time, so this is about towards the end of my notes, so I will settle down. But I had John 12:31 noted down. It says, now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. I'm not exactly sure why I had that in there, to be honest. I think it was just, I wanted to add it because just kind of emphasizing the prince of the world, which is Satan, being driven out. I think that's where I was going with that. But just kind of re-echoing Jesus' victory, like Satan being driven out, like, hey, your time's up. But yeah, so I want to throw that in. I had that in my notes. So just another reinstatement of Jesus' victory.
Yeah.
Driving out Satan.
And I think that's why I think for some people, so many people don't understand why Easter is such a big deal in the Christian faith.
Yeah.
And I think they don't know, or maybe they've forgotten that victory is what we celebrate. It's not just the fact that he rose from the dead. I think that's proof in and of itself. I mean, there's so much things with that. It's what we hinge our whole faith on. It is also the victory of what he has done of what we celebrate on Easter. And so that Saturday, as quiet as it was on this earth, was not quiet on a Saturday as he's proclaiming victory over the angels and those who have fallen and denied him. And if you do the timing, and was Judas in that mix? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just unique little pieces of that. Like, but yeah, it's that victory that is so important. So again, to kind of land the plane a little bit
I was about to say, we need to wrap this up and kind of do a recap.
Yeah, as we land the plane, kind of give me a Cliff Notes version of like what we're talking about. Why is Saturday important? What happened on Saturday? Give me kind of a quick recap, and then we'll close it out.
Saturday is so important because we know and have comfort now that Jesus experienced death in his fullness, and he went to where we are going to go as his followers when we die. And he fully experienced it, fully was conscious in it. So he knows what it was like. And he, not only did he go and experience it, but he proclaimed his victory over evil in paradise there. And then he not only did all that happen, but he came back to life and is alive and is able to help us and guide us. And through all that, he's a living counselor to help us through our suffering that understands every single aspect, suffering on this earth, all the way through death. He understands it all. And so you can walk through life if you have Jesus Christ, being totally confident because you know that you have a God living in you that has experienced every single kind of suffering, even to the point of death. So there's nothing that he can't help you with.
Yeah. So big. So big.
Huge.
Yeah. So hopefully it's encouraging. Hopefully it's something if you really want to do deep dives into, it's fascinating to kind of do that. But again, that's the whole purpose is victory over everything, life, death, spirits, everything. And that comfort of, like you said, knowing what's to come. So hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully it's something that's encouraging. This won't be, we'll hit different theological things as we go through this podcast. I think the next one will be, I can't guarantee when they'll drop, but the next one will either be an interview or we're going back into John. So biggest things you're going to see out of this podcast are looking at the book of John, but there'll be occasional things like this where we kind of just hit some theology pieces.
And this was a blast. I absolutely love doing research on this. I learned so much, and I think I grew, in my relationship with God so much in this because, this was like, we talked about the emphasis of how important this is. I learned so much, and I'm so glad we did this little deep dive on this because it is incredible.
I am too. The comfort it brought me of knowing what's next was huge. It's something I really hadn't done a ton of looking at. You know what I mean? Like I knew it wasn't quite. Anyway, get into that. So, all right. Well, till next time. Look for the next one to drop here soon. And till then, we're praying for you and signing out.
See you guys in the next episode of the Community Podcast.